the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John. And let's look together. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay, so let's remember Sue's granddaughter who will graduate from Converse and has a job at Burns. Wonderful. Yes, ma'am. So if y'all found John chapter 18, let's look at that together. Last time we were together, we looked at Matthew's gospel and the story of Jesus' trial and crucifixion and burial. And we've been kind of going through a harmony of Jesus' life from the different gospel accounts. But when we get to this part of the story, each gospel writer tells us some very important details. And so, as I mentioned to you last time, we don't really get a full picture unless we look at every gospel account. So I pondered whether I could just summarize some of these things, and I thought, well, no, we need to look at it together. It might take a little more time, but I think it's worth the time. So y'all have found John chapter 18. I'm going to start about verse 28. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. Now, the Roman governor, the procurator, typically lived in Caesarea. That was sort of where they did business with Rome. But during special times like Passover, he would have been in Jerusalem. And his main job from Rome was to keep the peace. And so Jerusalem would quadruple in size during Passover, people coming from everywhere to celebrate the Passover. And so it was a place that was ripe for conflict and strife and difficulty. And so Pilate is in Jerusalem, and so the Jewish religious leaders bring Jesus to the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. Now, John here is pointing out an incredible irony. They are worried about becoming ceremonially unclean as they hand the very Son of God over to be crucified. Do you see the irony in that? And what's going to defile them? Well, they think going in Pilate's house is going to defile them. Are they already defiled? Yes. Their hatred, their bitterness, their jealousy, all the things, all the evil that welled up to the point where they would turn the very Son of God over to be crucified. And they're worried about, following their own man-made rules about who can step in what house and that kind of thing. So John points out the irony of that. And I'd like to say that that's something we can point fingers at them and say, ooh, they sure are awful. But y'all know what happens when you point fingers. It does, doesn't it? Could it be possible that we are terribly, terribly concerned about things that don't really matter and we miss things that really do? That was one of the things that Jesus accused the religious leaders of. He said, you strain out gnats and you swallow camels. Now, I've swallowed enough gnats in my time to know that straining gnats is not such a bad thing, but I sure don't want to swallow a camel. We sometimes major on minors. And y'all ever been to the doctor? One of the things the doctor almost always does is he'll listen to my heart. Now, I don't know what kind of music it makes or exactly why he's interested in my heart, but he'll listen to it pretty much all the time that way when I go. But you know how you find out what's in your heart? Spiritually, one of the ways you find out is what you get upset about. Think about that for a minute. The things that get on your last nerve, the things that you react in anger about, often can reveal spiritually the condition of your heart. And we tend to major on minors. We get upset about things that really shouldn't, and things that we really should get upset about, we don't. And that was the case back then, and it's the case now too. So they're worried about being ceremonially unclean. How do you think Pilate felt about that? Do you think that was an insult to him, that they're not willing to go in his house? Well, he didn't want them there to begin with, but still, he's not oblivious to the insult that they intend there. So Pilate came out to them. So he's trying to keep the peace, and he's going to do what he can do. He came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." All right, so they're talking to the governor. They ought to show a little respect. Do they show any respect? No. He wants to know what they're charging him with, and they reply, "Well, he's obviously done something wrong, or we wouldn't be bringing him to you." I don't think that would fly in a court of law around here anyway. Pilate said, "Well, then take him yourself and judge him by your own law." So Pilate will do everything he can not to have to deal with Jesus. So you remember last time we looked at Matthew's gospel, and his wife has a dream, have nothing to do with this innocent man. And you remember Pilate asked for water and washes his hands of Jesus. So the very first thing he does is he tries to send him back and let the Jewish people govern themselves in this matter. Take him yourself, judge him by your own law. "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Do y'all know what's going to happen tomorrow? And we might make some guesses. I saw the weather forecast, after all. Who knows? They don't know. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. What's that? Yeah, I hope so. Hope we can have an FCA breakfast. But we don't. By the way, anybody want to get up real early and stir pancake batter in the morning? I asked my friend Nick what we needed. He said we needed somebody to come and stir pancake batter. I'll take names later. So we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, really. We just don't. Did Jesus? Yeah. He told them over and over the kind of death he was going to die. And the kind of death he dies helps us understand that he is who he claimed to be. He told them what was going to happen, including the fact that he would rise from the dead on the third day. And so John here reminds us that this is to fulfill what Jesus had said would happen. And so all of these things are part of the larger plan. As awful as the larger plan is, it's the only way for you and I to be saved. And so to fulfill these things, Jesus is moving ahead. Pilate then went back inside the palace and summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Pilate is asking a political question. Jesus claimed to be the Messiah. That Sunday before, he had come into the city riding a donkey, and the people greeted him with palm branches and laid their clothes out on the road. So, are you the king of the Jews? Are you the Messiah? Now, Pilate's not up on all the Jewish stuff, so he didn't say Messiah or Christ. Are you the king of the Jews? Is that your own idea, Jesus asked, or did others talk to you about me? Now, at first glance, that sounds like kind of an odd reply. But what's Jesus been doing? He's been raising dead people back to life. He's been bringing blind eyes to see. He's been healing people of every kind of disease. I wonder what Pilate knows about him already. Is this your own idea? In other words, have you looked at the evidence and made a decision about who I am? Or are you just going by what these people who are accusing me are telling you? Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and the chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders, but now my kingdom is from another place. All right, ponder that for a moment. Did Jesus come to bring political revolution? Was his mission to overthrow the Roman government? Was the Roman government in need of being overthrown? Yeah, they were evil. They were corrupt. I mean, a lot of our tax dollars are used for all kinds of weird stuff, but I mean, you think about the things the Roman emperors did with people's tax dollars. Goodness. So it would have been a righteous act to overthrow the Romans, but that's not what Jesus is here for. He's here for something else. His kingdom is a different kind of kingdom. His kingdom is a kingdom where people's hearts are changed one life at a time. Some people call it the upside down kingdom because the greatest is the one who serves in Jesus' kingdom. It is a kingdom of love. It is a kingdom that has eternal value. So he says, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. Now, we read Matthew's account, and you remember there it says that Jesus could have called 10, 12 legions of soldiers to prevent his arrest. But he doesn't. My kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. So Pilate's not entirely slow. He's picking up a little bit of what Jesus is laying down. Jesus answered, you say I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Is Jesus a king? Yes, he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. We think back even to the wise men who came looking for the newborn King of the Jews. We saw his star in the east. He is a king. It's the reason he was born. It's the reason he came into the world. And his kingdom is a kingdom of truth. Now, truth is slippery. And in our day and time, truth is very valuable, but it is hard to find. Would y'all agree? Jesus says, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. So as followers of Jesus, what is one of our characteristics if we're really followers of Jesus? Truth. All right, I'll go ahead and confess, I have not murdered anybody this week that I know of. And I won't ask you to make the same confession, but if you can, you maybe pat yourself on the back or something. And we think of murder as being an awful thing, and sure enough it is. But here Jesus says, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Is he saying that lying is much more serious than we think? Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. If we're lying, who are we working for? Yeah, Jesus earlier identified him as the father of lies. So sometimes we twist the truth to get our way. Sometimes we misrepresent things. Sometimes we tell some kind of white lie. But I hope you'll remember Jesus' conversation with Pilate. People on the side of truth are the ones who follow Jesus. Lying does a world of harm, mostly to the one who lies. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. And with this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. Does Pilate want to know the answer to his question? He doesn't. How y'all know? He didn't, did he? He just asked that question and stomps off. What is truth? Pilate may be of the opinion that truth doesn't really exist. That is the thought that a whole lot of our young people have, by the way. They've been disappointed with medical science. They've been disappointed with science. They've been disappointed with education. They've been disappointed with politics. And they've just decided there ain't no truth. Pilate says, what is truth? And storms off. He doesn't really want to know the answer to that question. Because if he knew the answer to that question, it would change his life. What is truth? Well, truth has a name, and that name is Jesus. Earlier in John's Gospel, Jesus says, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. He is the personification of truth. I find no basis for a charge against him. All the gospel writers are careful to help us to understand that Jesus did not meet the criteria for Roman crucifixion. But it's your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? They shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Now, when we looked at Matthew's version of this story, I told you what the word Barabbas meant. What y'all remember? Bar is son of. Abba is father. Son of the Father. And Matthew tells us Barabbas' first name. Anybody remember? Jesus. Jesus, the Son of God, or Jesus, the Son of the Father. Those are the choices the people have. They choose Barabbas. They choose this insurrectionist, this murderer. So Pilate tries again, unsuccessfully. And then he took Jesus and had him flogged. Now that's just one sentence there, and the gospel writers are mercifully brief when they talk about what happened to Jesus. But the people of Jesus' day would have understood that a lot of people didn't survive flogging. The Romans tried really hard not to kill you when they flogged, but sometimes they got a little carried away. But they used these whips that had parts of glass and bone and metal tied into it, and they basically filleted the person. And so often organs and things would be hanging out as someone finished being flogged. It was a horrific, awful thing. And the goal they had was to get you to almost to the point of death without killing you. And like I said, sometimes they got a little carried away and were punished for it. So Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe. They went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you and let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." And when Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." Or if you got a King James Bible, I like what it says there, "Behold the man." Pilate's intention is for the people to feel so sorry for Jesus that some compassion might well up in their hearts, and they might say, "You know, he's been through enough." Is that what happened? No. Where's their compassion? As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, You take him to crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. But the Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." There are people who do not believe that Jesus claimed to be God. Did Jesus' enemies, the religious leaders, think he claimed to be God? Yes. And because of that, they want him to die a painful and awful death. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. What's he afraid of? He's the one that's got the power. He's the one who can order the soldiers around. Jesus has been flogged. What's he afraid of? I think there is some fear of God mixed in here. I think Jesus presented himself even as someone near the point of death in a way that Pilate begins to question his decisions. Yep. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. He went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or crucify you?" All right, if he has the power to free him or crucify him, whose responsibility is it? It's Pilate's, right? Although, we got to broaden that a little bit because it also will include us eventually. Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down at the judge's seat, a place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. And they shouted, "Take him away, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priest answered. And finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. Y'all ever watched anybody play ping pong? You look over here, then you look over here, then you look over here, then you look over here. In a sense, that's kind of what's going on with Pilate, isn't it? He's a little afraid of condemning Jesus, but then they accuse him of being a traitorous, treasonous person against Caesar if he doesn't let Jesus go, and he just kind of goes back and forth. But he eventually gives in and condemns Jesus. They don't. They lie. We have no king but Caesar. Most of the Jewish people would have called that blasphemy. Who is their king supposed to be? God. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Now, we sometimes are mistaken in thinking that maybe this crucifixion thing was a one-time kind of occurrence. But in fact, the Romans crucified people all the time. They were really good at it. And when there were slave rebellions or other things, they would line whole highways with crucified bodies. Crucifixion was meant to be a deterrent. Don't mess with Rome. Roman citizens were exempt from crucifixion. We get our word excruciating. It literally means out of the cross. It was developed by the Persians and perfected by the Romans, crucifixion. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. And John differs here from his colleagues, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And John's heavy on theology. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Now I say he differs there. In the other gospel writers, what happens with Jesus' cross? Do y'all remember? Simon of Cyrene is pulled out of the crowd, and he carries Jesus' cross, and it turns out he has two children, Rufus and Alexander, who later become part of the church. And so that's pointed out by the other gospel writers. But John wants us to know that Jesus carried his own cross. So you could say that's a conflict. I prefer to think of it as a theological emphasis, because no one can carry Jesus' cross for him. No one can bear the weight of the sin of the world but Jesus. He goes to the place of the skull, Golgotha, or in Latin, y'all know any Latin? What's the place of the skull in Latin? Calvary. Calvary. Golgotha, Calvary. Same place. There they crucified him, and with him two others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Now, when we look at this story from Luke's perspective, he'll tell us a good bit more about these two people that Jesus was crucified with. But we know from reading the Old Testament that he would be crucified among transgressors. So it was prophesied that Jesus would be dying with those who had also transgressed. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. And this garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." And as you guys have read the scriptures, you know that this too was prophesied, and John wants to make sure we realize that. This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, "They divided my clothes among them, casting lots for my garment." So this is what the soldiers did. When I lived in Japan, I taught a lot of English classes, and on Sunday afternoon, the class that I taught was a group of neighbors. So it was kind of a mixed group of men and women who knew each other from the same neighborhood, and they wanted to learn English, and they wanted to learn from a native speaker. I taught them Southern English, I tried real hard to, take a little of the Southern out of my language. But our text was the Bible. And so we decided early on that we would study the Gospel of John together. And when we got to this point in the Gospel of John, this story that I had heard all of my life had a different effect on them. And the ladies in the group, tears began to stream down their faces. And I thought, wow, the power of God's word. It was the first time they had heard this story, and it moved them to tears. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Who is the disciple whom Jesus loved? John. We don't know that for a fact, but it's pretty good evidence that that's who it is. John's name is not found anywhere in his gospel. And there are times when the other gospel writers tell us it's Peter and John, but in John's gospel, it will be Peter and the other disciple. So he remains anonymous in his own gospel. Why would he call himself the disciple whom Jesus loved? Did Jesus love John more than the others? No, but he felt loved. And John will go on to write that we should know and rely on the love that God has for us. And if you can get to the point where you rely on the love that God has for you, that is empowering. John identifies himself as the beloved disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved. There's another little bit of a twist to that too. Daniel is called beloved, and he's the one who has visions of the end of time. What happens with John? Well, they try to kill him. Okay, well, let me finish with John first. They try to kill John, but he's exiled on the Isle of Patmos, and he has the vision that corresponds with the vision of Daniel. So they're both called beloved, and they both have this vision. They're both entrusted with this vision to give. But Sue's question is, what about Mary? Well, Luke will tell us that Mary was among the believers who gathered together after Jesus ascended into heaven, and that she was there on the day of Pentecost. Mary and Jesus' brothers. John has told us that Jesus' brothers did not believe in him. But Paul tells us that after Jesus rose from the dead, he appeared to his brother James, and James became a believer. And so you might be scratching your chin thinking, well, why didn't James then take care of his mama? Jesus entrusts the care of his mama to John. So tradition tells us that when John left Jerusalem, he settled in Ephesus, became the pastor of the church there in Ephesus, and that's where he cared for Mary until the Lord brought her home. Why would Jesus be worried about his family while he dies on the cross? You reckon he was worried about us too? It is. Did he die on the cross for Mary? As well as you and me. Is there a good time in our life to be selfish? I mean, what if you die on a cross? Shouldn't you just think about yourself and nobody else? That's not what Jesus did. He's concerned about John. He's concerned about his mother. He's concerned about you and me. Well, it's going to take us a little while to get all of these things together, but I sure am glad y'all are here with me for the journey. Father, thank you for your word. Strengthen us, help us, move us to tears as we think about the things you endured on our behalf. Help us and draw us close to you. Help us to know how much we are loved. In Jesus' name.